one of them broke the rod. I think I broke the line once, and the other one's just through the hook. Jumping and jumping and jumping.
Hey, what's up, everyone? John here from the Cast and Spear podcast, and today we have a fantastic episode with Josh Leisen from lifelistfishing.com. We're going to talk about how to get into life listing, the gear, some tips. I actually recorded this podcast last year, so it's a little bit late in getting it to you. Josh mentioned that he caught 492 species. That's actually been up to 561. So good job, Josh, for crushing the species list out there. So without further ado, please welcome Josh. So yeah, Josh, tell me, like, you're into this life list fishing. I just want to know how you came to love it.
Sure. Yeah, I started fishing with my dad when I was young. I grew up on the Mississippi River in Redwood, Minnesota, and my dad took me out fishing all the time to a medium-sized river. It had a good mix of species in it: walleyes, catfish, smallmouth bass, sheephead, sturgeon, you name it. And I always enjoyed just throwing a worm on the bottom and seeing what would take. A lot of folks there fish for walleye or smallmouth bass, but I was more into the unusual catches, the red horse suckers and the northern hog sucker, and kind of the obscure things that I just thought were so cool to catch those when I was young. And then I went to college at the University of Minnesota Duluth, and that's kind of, in my college years, I kind of really started to pursue different species of fish and make a list, and specifically, make road trips and research where different fish lived and different, fisheries reports, and poring over fish ID books to find distribution of different species and specifically track down the ones to add to the list.
What resources did you find the most valuable? Because I know there's the Peterson Guide and there's a whole bunch of other things, but which ones helped you the most?
Yeah, the Peterson Guide to Freshwater Fishes in North America is like a Bible for lifeless fishermen. It's a great identification guide, and it also has distribution maps for different species. So if you're planning a road trip somewhere, you can kind of pick spots by different watersheds and figure out which ones are the most species rich, or if you're going for a specific species, kind of planning a route to hit different spots where they're present. So it kind of depends. Each state has different resources. A lot of states in the eastern U.S. have a pretty good fishes of that state field guide, like Fishes of Alabama is an example of a really good one that I've used. So those kind of fish ID guides are a good resource for finding different species, as well as identifying your catch. They usually have dichotomous keys, good illustrations, and a good amount of information for how to identify what you've caught, which comes in handy, especially when you're fishing for lots of silvery little shiners that all look alike. There's clues you got to look for to tell them apart.
Absolutely. So if you're going on a road trip to a spot, you've done your research through the books, do you hit up forums, or do you like to go and try and do the adventure yourself to try and find them first, or do you hit up people, put the call out to try and find some watering holes? How do you reach out to the community?
Yeah, that's a good question. Kind of a mix of all of the above. It started off more so in forums. Roughfish.com is a great reference for different species, particularly non-bean fish. So that was a forum where I connected with other fishermen that were kind of keeping their own life lists as well. And I made some lifelong friends through those forums. So yeah, it's a mix of kind of connecting with different people, and social media too, Facebook and Instagram, finding, tips from people that live in an area and know it well. And it always helps to connect, meet up with somebody and fish with somebody that's from an area. You make good friends that way, and you learn about the native fish that way.
Absolutely. Is there a specific kind of setup that you use since you're targeting such a vast number of species? Like, do you have like a one kind of setup that your go-to, or do you have a whole bunch of different things, like a micro setup, a regular, and a bigger game? What's your arsenal look like?
Yeah, so I started off small. Like when I was a kid, my rig was basically a rod and reel with some line, nothing too fancy. Usually bottom fishing with a night crawler, so we'd have in rivers. So the rig would basically be a half ounce to an ounce lead weight, a small hook, and a night crawler. And that's about it on the rig. You can catch a lot of different species bottom fishing that way. That simple rig works well in saltwater too. You just use shrimp or squid instead of a night crawler. So live bait and small hooks pick up a big variety of fish, and that's a go-to rig for kind of anything from palm-sized fish up to a pretty big fish. For microfishing, that is a little bit specialized. So microfishing is kind of a side hobby of lifeless fishing where you're chasing fish that only get an inch or two long. A lot of those are shiners, different minnows, chubs, dace, darters, which are in the perch family, sculpins, kind of all of those little fish. A lot of them are very colorful. Microfishing can be an extraordinarily addicting type of fishing. You can stand over one individual fish that you see, like a darter in the rocks. It's like a one-on-one matchup with this little fish. And the rig for that consists of just the tiniest hooks. You can actually, I ordered them from a guy that sells them. He gets them from Japan. They're made in Japan. Tenkarabon is the website. And these hooks are, they're like a millimeter or two thin wire hook, and they'll fit inside the mouth of a shiner or a darter. And then I usually have like red worms, and I'll have a scissors, and I cut just a fleck of worm off with the scissors and use that as bait, or even flap a mosquito off your arm and use that for bait. I've done that before for microfishing. Wow. And then just that tiny hook and probably a split shot. So you're looking at a $5 rig for microfishing. Then you could catch. Travel is really the expense driving around to different watersheds, but a person could in the southeastern U.S. catch several hundred species on their lifeless with a $5 rig.
So I know you mentioned to me earlier before we started recording, but how many fish have you caught so far on the lifeless, just so everybody knows?
So I'm currently at 492.
That's impressive. How long did it take to get to there?
It took me until I was about 25 years old to reach 100. I did that in South Carolina, where I went to grad school. And since then, I've been planning bigger trips and expeditions with some of my fishing buddies to species-rich places around the world to specifically try to up that number as fast as I can. Fishing more saltwater helps. When you can use small baits in a warm tropical saltwater location, you can rack up species very quickly that way. And also, like I said, microfishing, once you open that can of worms, you can pick up species pretty quick. So I've been adding around 50 to 70 new species a year, and that's usually 2 week-long trips in a year. And then most of the time in between, I'm up here in Michigan where I live now. I might get out a couple of times to fish for trout, but I disc golf and I go running and I find other hobbies. I don't actually fish too much outside of the kind of expedition trips.
Absolutely. So I was talking to Steve Wozniak a couple months ago, and he got me into this whole IGFA, go for world record fish. Have you caught any world records or have tried that, or is it mainly just number of species you're focused on?
I tend to typically focus on the species. I'm not as interested in catching the world record. If I caught one, I probably wouldn't even apply for the world record unless it was really something special. I do paperwork for my job, and it's a little bit of paperwork, and I think there's a few to submit it, and I just don't really care enough to go through the process.
Absolutely, it's not super simple. I took a look at it.
It's not. It's not my focus in fishing, but I do have one suspect world record, and that's the snail bullhead. I caught a 15-inch snail bullhead in South Carolina, which is bigger than what the published literature says they get by 3 or 4 inches. In South Carolina, they don't have a specific snail bullhead category. They lump it together as bullhead, so it's competing against brown bullhead, which get bigger. So it doesn't qualify as a state record, and I didn't officially bring it in to have it weighed. I was catch and release, and I don't have the proper documentation to apply for a world record on that one, but it's probably the only one that would potentially be a record.
Do you do most of your fishing catch and release, or do you like to eat fish from time to time?
Most of it is catch and release, yeah. I do keep some for the table, particularly ice fishing. It's a lot of work going out in the cold, and you might catch 1 or 2 fish sitting out on the ice all day, and they keep well. You don't have to worry about having a cooler with ice because you just throw them up outside and they stay. So ice fishing, I keep what I catch, if it's legal. Other than that, it's mostly catch and release, yeah.
Awesome. Well, I want to hear some about some of your most memorable catches. Do you mind going into some of some of your top three?
Sure. Yeah. Top three. One of them that comes to mind is Great Barracuda. So back in 2012, I had an opportunity to volunteer at a backpackers outpost in Belize, and did about 6 weeks of volunteering. But also worked in a couple of weeks to just have vacation time and fishing. So I was on Key Cocker, which is one of the small islands off the coast of Belize. There's an American barrier reef. Great species hunting place there. Caught close to 50 species during my time in Belize there. But one of my favorite ones from that trip was definitely the Great Barracuda. At the beginning of that trip, I tried for them and failed. Couldn't find one. Volunteered for 6 weeks, and then the final week I was in Belize, I had another week to fish. And in the first few days of the effort, I hooked a couple barracuda, smaller ones. They got off. They broke the line. I hooked a couple of big ones that actually grabbed smaller fish that I had hooked. And I didn't have the rig for it, or they let go of the fish. They weren't even hooked. So on the last day of the trip, I kind of given up on barracuda, but I did bring some whole herring in a canoe and paddled around Key Cocker in the shallows and gave it one more shot. I kind of free-lined herring on a hook and just let it slap the water and sink for a bit, and paddled my way up the coast. And one hit, as soon as that herring hit the top of the water just exploded. And then seconds later, behind me, I heard a big fish jump, and that fish had just covered so much ground so rapidly. I turned around, and I didn't even know that was the fish on my line until my line snapped tight the other direction. In the canoe, just crazy, dude. The fish just kept jumping, and at that time I knew I had it, steel and drag, got it close to the boat, and I didn't have a net or anything. Fortunately, it was hooked in the front of the mouth, and I was able to, like a fishing for pike, grab it kind of behind the eyes and lift it into the canoe. It wasn't a huge barracuda, but it was a decent specimen, probably weighed 6 to 8 pounds. That was definitely it was probably my top target when I was there, and I got it at the end of the trip, so that was very memorable.
Dude, congrats. Those things look gnarly. Those big teeth in the front.
I've only caught one, but I'd love to go back and get one of those. That was fun.
Yeah, I think they get up past, like, if you got the most mature one in like the 50-pound range too. So you got some weight gap for your next one.
Yep.
It's gonna be awesome.
I don't think I'd want a 50-pound barracuda in the canoe with me.
No, man, not at all. What about
get bloodied up?
Absolutely. So, have you caught any sharks before?
I have, yeah. So when I lived in South Carolina for a couple of years, I did sneak away to the coast to try surf fishing for sharks. My buddy David Green introduced me to that, and the first time I went, he let me use his surf gear. He has like the heavy line, the big, a 10, 12-foot surf rod, and a pretty strong reel that can handle a large shark. So I got hooked on it right away because I caught a big stingray with him the first time I went out, and that was a blast. And he was telling me all these stories of the blacktip sharks and lemon sharks that they catch. So I invested in my own gear, and the next summer I went down trying to catch a blacktip shark. Caught several rays the first few times of that year, and then another time, June 2011, was my former parents-in-law, I guess, were down on vacation, and my ex-stepdad, my ex-wife's father, I was kind of helping him try to catch something. He had never fished in saltwater before, and he got a blacktip shark right away in the trip, which got my hopes up high because I'm like, yep, this should be a good day for it. And then several hours went by, nothing, and I didn't think that would be the day. Went to check my line as we were leaving in the evening to reel in. I was pulling in the last line, and something hit hard right when I took the rod out of the rod holder. Hooked into it, and it was a blacktip shark. Saw the fin in the water, and fortunately I got it into the surf, and it was about a 4.5-foot shark. So that was really cool. I had caught baby Atlantic sharp-nosed sharks before, which, they're a few, a foot long, but this was my first kind of real shark. So that was quite an experience.
How long did it take for that thing to be pulled in?
I don't remember. I think it was about 15 minutes probably.
Hey man, that's a hell of a fight. Arms get tired. Arms get tired after 10, in my opinion. That's awesome.
Yeah, and the fish like that, they use the breaking waves to their advantage.
Yep.
You get 3-foot waves coming in, they turn sideways, and they use that alkaline water to help. So it's a tug of war battle for sure.
Absolutely. Have you done any fishing in the Amazon by chance?
I have, yes. 2016, I was fortunate to go with a group of 6 of us went down there, and several of them are lifeless anglers that have more species than I do. George Brinkman, he's one of the 3 lifeless anglers that I know of that are in the thousands of species. He just got his 1,000th fish last year, I believe. Then my friends Ken C. and Ben Cantrell, they both have more species than I do, and I've done several trips with both of them. They've become some of my best friends now. So, but that trip was awesome. We went with Otorango Expeditions. They're a lodge downstream of Iquitos, Peru, in the Peruvian Amazon. It was a good deal, and they really did an excellent job getting us on fish, getting up at the crack of dawn, fishing until after dark every day for 6 days. They highly recommend checking them out if you ever get a chance to go to that area. But one of my favorite catches from that trip was my first peacock bass. It's a fish I've seen in fishing magazines and kind of daydreamed about when I was a kid, never really knowing if I'd ever get a chance to go down to the Amazon and catch one. The way we got it was pretty cool, too. From the lodge, we had to take the large river boat up a tributary from the Amazon River and then take small rowboats and row them for about a mile up these tiny creeks that were choked with woody debris. We had to get out and pull and shimmy and shake the boats and the gear over log jams, and it just felt like we were in a Discovery Channel documentary or something, part of the Amazon. And then it opens up into this lagoon or a lake, freshwater lake, and just choked with woody debris. Great spot for peacock bass, and we chucked rattle traps and spinners. And I caught my first peacock bass was a pretty small one, but I was happy to add it to my list. And then later in the day, I hooked into a really nice sized one, and it just jumped, and just that first sight of the fish coming out of the water, like rainbow sherbet. It's like bright green, bright orange, yellow, and red with black bars on it. Just a beautiful fish, and just fighting it. It's like fishing for largemouth bass, but just on steroids. They fight really hard, kept jumping and jumping, and in that woody debris, it was a battle keeping it out. Pretty light gear that we were using too, but happy to have the guide net that one and get some good pictures of that, and that's one of my favorite catches from that trip.
You're the second guy on the podcast who's spoken so highly about peacock bass. I remember Dan Smith gave another kind of account the same way. I'm just like, dang, I need to get myself to the Amazon real quick. I want to go experience this. Sounds amazing.
I want to go back.
Absolutely. So we talked about, 3 of your most memorable catches. Did you ever have a fish that, got away that you still dream about? Nightmares about, I guess?
Yeah, there's a few. The top one on my list of the one that got away would have to be the tarpon. So on that Belize trip, I actually hooked 7 tarpon, and they were probably all 20 to 40 pound range, which by the time I hooked and lost my 7th, I was kind of hoping I'd find some smaller ones so I'd have a chance. I had medium action, 4-piece Shakespeare travel rods with probably 12-pound mono line, regular bass fishing reel. So I wasn't really equipped for a 40-pound tarpon, and one of them broke the rod. I think I broke the line once, and the other one's just through the hook, jumping and jumping and jumping. It's definitely a rush to hook into a tarpon. I'd love to experience actually getting one anywhere close to me, because usually it's just drag peeling out and then getting off. A couple years later, I had a second chance at them. I was in Puerto Rico, and I hooked one off a pier there. And again, it jumped a few times, fought it for maybe a minute, and the hook came back straightened on a jig head with a shrimp on a jig head. So now I'm up in Michigan and have no idea when the next shot I have at him, but that's definitely high on my want to get list.
Man, that sounds crazy. So I know you've been to Thailand, and I'm actually headed to Thailand in a couple of months, and I believe you have some crazy stories you can talk about your time over there fishing a little bit. Mind going into that?
Yeah, so Thailand was kind of a misguided adventure, I'd say. I studied abroad in Australia when I was 20 years old, and I was in Perth on the western coast of Australia for a semester, spring semester, and My buddies were just going to spend Easter break hanging around town. No big plans to go see stuff. We didn't have vehicles when we studied. Me and my buddies from America that were studying abroad didn't have a vehicle, so we weren't going anywhere to see much. And I wanted to get some more, experience when I was out there. So I decided to book a flight all by myself, round trip flight to Bangkok, because it was only $400, pretty good trip round deal from Perth. So I did that, thinking I'd try to get some fishing in, but not really having anything booked, except my first 3 nights of a hotel in Bangkok. So it was actually cheaper to get an 11-day stay than a shorter trip. So I went with 11 days, and I got up there, and I was, a college student on a very low budget, and I had about enough to pay for food and a hotel when I was in Bangkok, and 1 day of guided fishing, which I booked at the end of the trip. And when I got there, I was overwhelmed. I hadn't really traveled that much by myself before, and it was the first time I've been in a country where most people don't speak English, and just that size of a city. It was overwhelming. I was like, what do I do for the next 10 days until I go fishing? So I had to find ways to occupy myself, and I also came down with a really bad sore throat and cold, so I was kind of alone and miserable for 11 days in Bangkok. And I also didn't have enough money to really go on any other tours during my stay. So I was kind of just killing time walking around the city and fending off the vendors trying to sell me everything. So that was kind of an adventure. If I could replan it now, I would get out of the city and get into the countryside. I think I would have enjoyed it a lot more. But I was worth it, because the last day of fishing, I did a guided trip to Bangsamran Lake, a fishing park, and it's a company called Fish Thailand UK, and they put me on a lot of nice fish. I caught, I think, 11 Mekong giant catfish and 5 striped catfish, and the average size of those fish was in the 30-pound range up to 50 pounds, which at that time was by far the biggest fish I've ever caught, and still by far the most weight of fish I've ever pulled in one day. My back hurt and I had blisters on my hands, but I was really happy after that day.
Did they let you borrow gear, or did you catch that on the gear that you brought over?
I didn't have any gear with me on that trip, so that was all rented gear from the guide.
Sweet. So what is this death march you mentioned about? And other times you almost got hit by lightning.
Yeah, so you can read more about my Thailand blog on my website. It's lifelistfishing.com. I also have a blog about the Death March. But to give you a quick summary of that one, this was back on the Mississippi River near my hometown. It was with my ex-wife at the time. We planned a canoe trip to paddle about a mile downstream from a boat launch on the Mississippi River and camp on a sandbar and fish for flathead catfish. It was a spot where I had success and caught flatheads up to about 30 pounds. I was excited to get out there because it had been several years since I'd had the opportunity to fish that spot. Got out there, set up a tent, started fishing, and just after nightfall, it started raining, and we heard lightning and thunder in the background. I decided to get in the tent and try to, wait it out, get out of it. Lightning was crashing all about, and we were kind of worried that with the tent poles being out on the sandbar, we were kind of the highest thing. So we had the idea to take the poles out of the tent and lay in the tent flat. Well, everything got soaked within a minute. And then we decided that we were only about a mile away from the car. So we're like, let's just pull the canoe up on the bar. We'll walk back to the car, sleep at home, and coming back in the morning to get the stuff. We're both wearing shorts and T-shirts because it's a warm, muggy summer night. The woods that we walked back to the car were about 100% waist-high wood nettle, which is like a stinging nettle. And where there wasn't wood nettle, it was raspberry and blackberry bushes, which are thorny and scratchy. The bank was steep, the water was deep, so there wasn't a way to wade through the water. So we were in a lightning storm in the middle of the night, just downpouring, walking through stinging nettle for a mile to get back to the car. And both of our legs were just swollen up, cut, red, itching like crazy. And that was maybe the most miserable 30 minutes of my life physically, just unbearably crazy itching. So call that the Death March.
That sounds horrible. How long did it take for your skin to get back to normal?
The itching stops after a couple hours. definitely have a good night's sleep at home. It was good. Probably a couple of days. It wasn't too bad after that, but during that march through the meadow, that was not a fun experience.
Well, I'd love to keep going on your next two craziest situations if you're still down to talk about this topic.
Yeah, we could do that.
Dude, all right. I'd love to hear a little bit about this hitchhiking on a foreign train, or on a freight train. Sorry.
On a freight train? Yeah. So this is when I was in back in Red Wing, Minnesota. I had a spot on the Cannon River, which is a tributary to the Mississippi. It's the river that my dad took me to when I was young fishing. That's where I grew up learning to love to fish. And one of the best spots was on the train trestle bridge, which unless you're boating or canoeing in, there's no way to get to it except to walk the train tracks in from town, which is about, I don't remember, probably about a mile or two. It's not too far. But went fishing there. On the way back, it was the evening, sun was setting. I'm walking along the train tracks, and a train starts coming the way I'm headed. And I just kind of, I didn't want to be in the way. They were going really slow, but I kind of got out of the way to let the train pass. It was going very slow, and it started to go slower and slower. And the train actually stopped right where I was. And the engineer came out and asked me if I wanted to ride, which really surprised me. I was kind of expecting to get yelled at for walking along the train tracks. But I said, okay. So I handed up my fishing rod and my tackle box and climbed into the engine. And they actually let me sit there and told me what all the instruments do. And they turned the train on and brought me the mile back to my car. So that was an unexpected adventure.
Well, that's very kind of them. Was it the old school kind of coal-fired train, or was this one of the newer ones?
One of the newer ones.
I was going to hope that you were going to shovel some coal into that furnace.
That would have been kind of fun.
Yeah. Cool, man. And the last crazy thing you got yourself into was puking at a Romanian children's hospital. What's up with that?
Yeah, this is just kind of one of those, like, how did I end up here moments. So this was in 2015. My sister was volunteering at a children's hospital in Romania, which she's done several 3-month stints volunteering there. So this time, I'm looking at the Fishes of Europe book that I have, and I'm thinking, let's plan a trip to go visit my sister and do some fishing in Romania and see Transylvania. So go over there, and the fishing was great. Caught lots of micros. I didn't get into any of the bigger species I was hoping to, but got a few species of fish on the trip. But also signed up to volunteer at the children's hospital that my sister volunteered at. Unfortunately, I ate something, I think it was a shawarma. I don't know which part of it was, but I got food poisoning the night before, and it lasted into the next morning when I was supposed to be volunteering. My sister told me to suck it up, you're volunteering, you're on the schedule, and I'm like, no, I seriously don't feel well. And she's like, come on. So I go into this children's hospital, and there's no air conditioning. It's probably 100 degrees and humid in there. And we go up to like the 4th floor, and my sister hands me like an orphan baby and has me hold it. And I don't have too much experience holding babies, for one. And I've got food poisoning, and it took me about 5 minutes before I started to feel really sick. And I'm like, you have to take this baby. And she's like, tell me to just suck it up. And I'm like, nope. I pushed the baby into her arms, and I kind of projectile vomited into the sink in the bathroom. And then I got told by the nurse that I have to leave if I'm sick. So I found a park in downtown Brașov, Romania to lay down in, and just let the sun hit me and try to recover from my food poisoning. So it's kind of one of those things that you plan a fishing trip, but you find yourself doing something that's not related to fishing, and kind of wonder, how did I get here?
I love shawarma, but I was in Budapest a couple months ago, and I ate a shawarma from the street vendor and had food poisoning for the first time in my entire life, and it is no joke, man. Like, it's the most miserable feeling ever.
It is. That was the first time I'd had it as well, and
Like, I feel for you. Like, everything you were just saying, I was
stay
like,
away from the shawarmas if you don't trust where they were made.
Absolutely. So you've done some pretty awesome expeditions. I know that you said that you went to Peru and Belize. Do you mind talking a little bit about those? Kind of recapping them? a little bit? Because it seems like you caught a ton of species during those trips.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with the Peru one. So that was kind of a year in advance planning process with me and Ken and Ben and George, my ex-wife at the time, friend Michael. And we decided, we all wanted to go to the Amazon at some point, and we connected on some dates and found the Adirongo Expeditions Lodge, decided to book that, and we made it happen. So we had 6 full days committed to fishing from that lodge. Flew down to Iquitos and basically got on a riverboat that took us to the lodge where we lived for the 6 days. Pretty much got up every morning before dawn, really, before it was light out, and had a breakfast on the boat while we were heading to a fishing spot, and we fished all day. Spent a couple of days on the actual main stem Amazon River, which I was amazed at how wide it is. It's about a mile wide in Iquitos, Peru, which is about 3,000 miles upstream from the mouth of the Amazon River to the Atlantic Ocean. And there are actually like ocean liner ships, like there's at least a couple that were like stuck on sandbars. And it's just crazy to think that ocean liners are coming up the Amazon 3,000 miles. That blew my mind, just how big of it really is. Because it's got, at that point, it's got tributaries coming in from Ecuador and in Peru from the Andes, and they're carrying a lot of water. So it's a big river. Luckily, we had good guides. They're really familiar with fishing and put us on fish. Had some great action with catfish. I caught 48 species in 6 days, which is exceptional. Caught, I think, 18 species of catfish alone, including the red-tail catfish, which is a beautiful-looking fish that gets pretty big. It's got kind of a black back with a cream yellow belly, and the tail fin is bright red. And then the head has like kind of a caramel brown color with black spots, and they're a really cool fish. It's another one that I've always wanted to get, looking at pictures online, daydreaming. So catching that was really cool. Some of the catfish there have like razor hooks, like scutes, like a sturgeon kind of, but they hook out more. It's really hard. They're called the armored catfishes. Just really unique stuff that we don't have anything really similar up here in the eastern U.S. 5 species of piranha. I didn't know going into that trip that I think there's 30-some species or more of piranha in South America. So we got the red belly, which is kind of your common, you see them in aquarium trade and stuff, but 4 other species of piranha that we caught on the trip. I did get nipped by a tiny one because it was a micro-sized piranha, about an inch or 2 long, and I didn't give it the due respect, thinking, it's so tiny. Well, it took a little nip out of my index finger.
Oh, snaps.
Which it didn't hurt bad, but in the Amazon River, it was a pain because I'm using that for all kinds of putting bait on hooks and stuff and trying to keep that from getting infected. It just was an extra step I had to think about for the rest of the trip. So definitely a remote area, but it was cool to camp in the Amazon. One night we left the lodge and we actually camped on a stream bank. The guide set up basically just a simple tarp over some sleeping mattresses and mosquito netting, and we basically slept on the ground in the Amazon rainforest. That was a cool experience.
Did you have any encounters with any nasty bugs or critters at night, or were the mosquito nettings enough to protect you?
Yeah, we did get mosquitoes at night. During the day, it was pretty hot and sunny, and that pretty much discouraged the bugs from coming out. I think we all did a pretty good job of covering our skin. We had buffs and long sleeve pants and long sleeve shirts and long pants. So we didn't get too bad with the bugs. The worst was in some of the clay banks that we fished from. There were like black midges that would get into everything and bite, leave little itchy red welts. So there was some bug action, and we did take anti-malarial pills to, ward off malaria, and it was an area where we had to get yellow fever vaccination prior to going. So definitely a few insect-related things to think about, but overall not too bad.
That's awesome, man. How about Belize?
So Belize, I kind of covered that a little bit, but we went down there to volunteer at the Backpackers Lodge for a couple of months. It's called Barton Creek Outpost. That was a really cool experience. just living in the jungle there. There's a freshwater creek, Barton Creek, that we were living on that we got to fish and caught some different cichlids there, and some tetras that lived there. Got to go to Guatemala for a couple of days and visit the ruins at Tikal, which I highly recommend. It's a Mayan archaeological site. Really cool area to explore, and it's nearby Lago Peytonitza, which is a large lake in that area that I had a couple hours to fish, and I caught a couple of cichlids there, the yellow belly Salvini cichlid and redhead cichlid.
So there's going to be a lot of people who want to know what's the most efficient way to track all these different species that they're going to be catching, over the next couple of years. And I was hoping, since you have so many species under your belt, what's the easiest, most effective system for keeping track of them all? Do you just have like a Google spreadsheet? Do you have, just a pen and paper and you just write it down? Do you take pictures of it? Like, what's your process?
Yeah, so I definitely recommend when you're fishing, take pictures of any fish that you're not absolutely certain of its identity. And sometimes take pictures of details of that fish so you can look at fin ray counts or lateral line scales, because that's important for identifying what you've caught. As far as tracking it, I kind of started off just keeping a list in a Word document, and then that quickly evolved into Excel spreadsheets. And I still keep an Excel spreadsheet kind of as a master file, and I have that on my website, lifelistfishing.com. I have my whole life list. And the basic information I track is how many of each species I've caught. And I'd like to give a shout out to my dad for helping me keep track and logging my fishing trips. When I started fishing, I think I was about 9 years old. I've kept track of every fish that I've caught. So I don't have just the species. I actually know how many of each species. So I keep a tally as well. So that's really cool to start that young and have that information as you fish more. But yeah, I guess between Excel spreadsheet and the website, that's kind of how I track it.
Perfect, man. That's all the real questions I have right now off the top of my head. How can people find you?
They can email me at lifelistfishing@gmail.com. It's lifelistfishing, all one word. My Instagram is @lifelistfishing. Feel free to follow me there or send me a direct message. And then my website is lifelistfishing.com.
Awesome. Is there anything else? Is there any asks you want of the audience? Is there anything that you want them to think about or do?
It's a question I didn't think of ahead of time, but I guess I would suggest, thinking thoughtfully about how you approach lifeless fishing, which is something I'm trying to do more of. Like trying to reduce my carbon footprint, for example. Obviously, jet setting around the world to catch different species, in the face of climate change, kind of, I feel a little bit of guilt about that sometimes, but I think being thoughtful and planning trips, not just driving willy-nilly all over the place every time, but trying to minimize your impact by taking longer trips to an area rather than, jetting somewhere for 2 or 3 days, can be helpful in that. Obviously, threatened and endangered species is an issue that comes up. I don't target species that are threatened or endangered. There's 30-some thousand species of fish out there. You can fish and chase species your whole life and have great success building a life list without ever needing to go after those species that are already endangered. So there's no reason to put extra pressure on a species that's not doing so well out in nature. So,
do you have any species that when you do see people take pictures of them kind of irks you? Like, what are your top 1 or 2, just so people are aware? Because some people don't, look at their threatened status beforehand. But is there some that are kind of like overly targeted that you would say let's back off a little bit?
I don't know anything of a specific species. One thing that does irk me is fish that are wasted, whether it's anglers or bow fishermen or anybody that is killing a fish, whether it's endangered or not, and, leaving it at a boat ramp to stink up a place that's, used by the public, or, just wasting a fish's life but not utilizing it. That irks me. I'm fine with it if you're going to eat it, or, even, some people say they use it for fertilizer. If you're really doing that, sure. But if you're just throwing it on a bank to rot, then that definitely gets under my skin.
I hear you on that. Well, cool, man. I really appreciate you taking the time to, come on the podcast and share your wisdom. I think you're going to inspire a lot of people to really, up their game when it comes to species hunting and fishing, so that they can try and catch up to you. You're so far ahead.
Yeah, and I don't see it as a competition. Contact me for tips, and it especially works well if I like trading tips with people too. People around the world have fish that I haven't caught yet, and I've got fish that they haven't. So let's help each other out and trade tips.
Well, that does it for this episode of the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got a lot out of it as much as I did. I'm sure going to use all these tips to increase my species count this year, and I hope you do the same. If you haven't already done so, please do me a huge favor and go to iTunes and leave a review and a rating. I read them all. Please tell me how I can make this podcast better for you. And until next time, keep those lines tight. Good luck out there. See ya.